a 34-year-old Somali national, validated as Africa's best male referee and selected as one of just 52 elite officials globally, is detained for 11 hours at Miami International Airport and subsequently deported, despite possessing a valid visa, diplomatic passport, and FIFA credentials. This pivotal June 6 detention did not occur in isolation, but followed a documented pattern, starting in December 2025, when a critical portion of Iran's World Cup delegation, including Federation President and FIFA committee member Meditage, was barred from attending the tournament draw in Washington. Since the tournament's commencement, entire categories of essential personnel have faced systemic obstructions. The Iranian national team is currently forced to base operations in Mexico because 14 key staff members are inadmissible to the United States. Iraq's qualifying hero, Ayan Hussein, was treated as a terror suspect for 7 hours at O'Hare, while his team's photographer was permanently excluded. And over 40 ticket-holding Moroccan fans have been flatly turned away. Even domestic stadium workers in Los Angeles and Seattle, whose accreditation required them to disclose personal data, have felt compelled to authorize strike action over verified fears that plainclothes immigration agents, confirmed by DHS Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen to be operating inside match venues, might detain them mid-shift. This operational reality clashes starkly with the projected $40.9 billion in economic activity, a figure now complicated by a documented 14% drop in transatlantic flight bookings as this expanded 48-team, 104-game tournament increasingly operates not on a platform of sporting merit, but in what academic observers are terming a climate of exclusion. That sequence is not coincidental. It is a direct result of specific U.S. domestic policies applied with blunt force to a global sporting event that, by its very design, was supposed to overcome national boundaries. When U.S. Customs and Border Protection cited only vetting concerns for Arten's expulsion, only to have an anonymous official later allege specific associations with suspected members of terror organizations to ESPN. The strategic significance lies not in the unproven allegation itself, but in the administration's deliberate choice to make an official FIFA referee the public face of its enforcement capabilities, creating immediate, chilling uncertainty for every visitor. The institutional detachment displayed by FIFA President Gianni Infantino, who stated that executives are not kings of the world and cannot override sovereign host governments, functionally provides a political shield, allowing the football governing body to prioritize lucrative media contracts and sponsor relationships while ignoring the strategic fracturing of its flagship tournament's operational integrity. This policy of systematic exclusion is having quantifiable economic consequences. Beyond the emotional toll, the American Hotel and Lodging Association reported in April 2026, fully 8 weeks before kickoff, that 80% of hotels in World Cup cities were already falling short of projection as international visitors, seemingly factoring in the risk of arbitrary border decisions and an aggressive security apparatus, are choosing not to travel, leaving luxury suites booked for $480 in Los Angeles and $227 elsewhere unexpectedly vacant. The joint three-nation hosting bid for 2026 was explicitly designed to distribute the strategic risk of exclusion that FIFA knew was inherent in awarding MATC keys solely to the United States. Yet the ongoing presence of Iran in a Tijuana hotel waiting room, with permission to cross only 24 hours before a game, confirms that the planned risk distribution has not solved the policy conflict, but has instead converted neighbors Mexico and Canada into operational pressure release valves for a broken American tournament design. But the question remains whether the visible, documented pattern of enforcement can still be reconciled with the stated goals of global engagement, or if the deeper implication is that the United States is redefining what it actually means to host a truly global event. The opening matches of this expanded 48-team World Cup have established a dual reality. While elite sporting competition proceeds across North American venues, an aggressive, parallel enforcement strategy at the United States border continues to systematically restructure who can physically participate. What began as an isolated border dispute at Miami International Airport involving Somali referee Omar Artan has rapidly expanded into an unprecedented operational decoupling, highlighted by the Iranian national team executing its entire group stage preparation from a hotel room in Tijuana, Mexico, because 14 core administrative staff remain legally barred from entering American territory. The strategic landscape is no longer defined by the idealistic rhetoric of a unified three-nation tournament footprint, but by an overt clash between global sporting infrastructure and the uncompromising exercise of American border sovereignty. Miami heralded that tension crystallized on June 14th, when Andrew Giuliani, the executive director of the White House World Cup Task Force, addressed the growing international backlash surrounding Artan's deportation. Giuliani stated, in the case of the referee there, he was talking to some very bad people right as he was coming to the United States, asserting that classified intelligence justified the 11-hour interrogation and immediate removal under Section 8235 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. What that response reveals is a deliberate choice by the administration to prioritize unverified intelligence metrics over diplomatic sports agreements, signaling to international bodies that prior State Department clearance offers zero protection against expedited removal. CBS News' this assertion of unchecked unilateral authority has fundamentally broken the tripartite host agreement that FIFA carefully brokered to insulate its commercial product from individual national policies. By utilizing expedited removal procedures without public evidence, the administration has structurally forced neighboring host nations to absorb the operational overflow, transforming Mexico into a logistical holding area for restricted delegations and positioning Canada as a vocal alternative for rejected talent. What this systemic shifting of personnel does is disrupt the training centralization that FIFA mandates, rendering the uniform physical and technical preparation of players and officials functionally impossible across separate legal jurisdictions. The commercial fallout from this enforcement pivot is now being documented by real-time economic data that directly contradicts initial tournament growth forecasts. The American Hotel and Lodging Association's April 2026 data confirmed that 80% of hotels in U.S. host cities were already tracking significantly behind their peak booking curves, an anomaly directly mirrored by a 5.2% drop in overall international arrivals during the year's opening months. This contraction demonstrates that the international consumer base is executing a calculated risk assessment, choosing to skip the tournament entirely rather than navigate a border regime where valid tickets and pre-approved travel authorizations can be summarily revoked at the port of entry. The resulting diplomatic fracture has now extended deep into the executive tier of European football, breaking the consensus of silence usually maintained by Western sports institutions. Following the U.S. deportation, UEFA President Alexander Ceferin counter-programmed the American narrative by directly appointing Artan to referee the high-profile European Super Cup match between Paris Saint-Germain and Aston Villa on August 12th. That sequence is not coincidental. It is a calculated institutional rebuke from European football's governing body, designed to validate Artan's elite professional standing on the world stage, while subtly undermining the credibility of the secret intelligence claims utilized by Washington to bar him. The Guardian, to prevent total financial ruin for its affected personnel, FIFA has quietly initiated its own economic intervention, confirming via Reuters that Artan will receive his full tournament fee despite not taking the pitch for a single minute of domestic play. This unprecedented financial commitment illustrates that the governing body recognizes the systemic nature of the disruption, choosing to absorb the cost of the host nation's border policy, rather than allow a high-profile official to be penalized financially by arbitrary state exclusions. This financial reallocation shifts FIFA's role from an authoritative tournament organizer to a reactive containment vehicle, spending capital to manage the friction generated by its own choice of host country. Goal.com, the true indicator of how deeply this geopolitical friction will alter the tournament's competitive equilibrium, now rests on an imminent administrative deadline. As group stage play concludes and the knockout rounds approach, teams from travel-restricted nations must secure emergency administrative waivers to transition their support apparatus out of temporary hubs in Tijuana and Vancouver to follow their rosters into deep American territory. The critical strategic calculation, the one that national federations and stadium operators are tracking with intense scrutiny, is whether the White House will grant these critical late-stage waivers, or if an advancing team will find itself playing a World Cup quarterfinal entirely stripped of its managerial staff. The structural partitioning of this World Cup demonstrates that a sports mega-event can no longer bypass the realities of hard border sovereignty or insulate its commercial interests from unilateral domestic policies. The friction observed from Miami to Seattle is the logical outcome of an international system, where security mandates routinely override multilateral agreements, forcing sports institutions and foreign states to structurally adapt to the domestic legal framework of the primary host nation. For Canada, this dynamic has provided an opening to execute a calculated strategy of diplomatic differentiation, positioning its major urban centers as predictable, open alternatives to a restrictive American border regime by actively courting excluded personnel like Omar Artan and maintaining an uninterrupted group stage welcoming list for over a dozen diverse nations. Ottawa has successfully enhanced its soft power capital on the global stage. What this strategic positioning accomplishes is a practical rebalancing of the tournament's geographic gravity, demonstrating that Canada is capable of operating as an independent, legally distinct jurisdiction within a continental footprint for Europe and the broader international football community. The response has been a deliberate deployment of institutional counterweights designed to protect global talent and preserve professional autonomy. The rapid intervention by UEFA to appoint Artan to the prestigious European Super Cup final in Salzburg, paired with FIFA's unprecedented decision to guarantee his full World Cup compensation, reveals a coordinated effort to neutralize the professional and financial penalties imposed by arbitrary state exclusions. This financial and operational pushback establishes a clear structural precedent, signaling that global sports bodies will utilize their own independent liquidity and regional tournaments to insulate their personnel from the shifting political priorities of host governments. India today for the United States, the immediate calculation remains anchored in a firm defense of domestic enforcement over international prestige, even when that choice yields quantifiable economic contractions across the hospitality and aviation sectors. By choosing to enforce strict intelligence-driven vetoes and placing a heavily reinforced federal security presence inside active venues, Washington has signaled that its internal security calculus is entirely non-negotiable for foreign entertainment properties. This prioritization firmly establishes that the financial windfalls of a $40 billion tourism event will be compromised to maintain absolute domestic boundary control. The single most important takeaway from this tournament is that the era of the friction-free global sports mega-event has officially ended, replaced by an environment where sovereign borders dictate the boundaries of global culture. The visible, documented fracturing of the 2026 World Cup across 3 separate jurisdictions proves that geographic expansion no longer guarantees global inclusion when the underlying legal systems remain fundamentally opposed. Ultimately, the true legacy of this tournament will not be determined by the final score on the pitch, but by the permanent structural reality that international talent can no longer reliably cross the threshold of the American door.